Welcome to FedScoop TV. I'm Wyatt Cash, and we're here at the Red Hat 2016 Government Symposium. And joining us is Adam Clater. Adam is Chief Cloud Architect at Red Hat. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So we're talking about open source, and I'd like to ask first, what's your sense of the strides that open source has made in the federal government during this recent administration, and where do you see it going?
Sure. So the federal government has long been a contributor to open source software. They've got a very rich history in doing that. Even preceding this administration in 2004, we had some OMB type documents that came out that said open source, commercially supported open source should be treated like COTS software. So that was a huge stride forward. I think what we've seen, especially in the last 8 years, is this idea of a lot of the concepts of open source and open communities making their way into how we have even everyday conversations. And so that acceptance of openness throughout the government, having an open government, has led to the embrace that we've seen just in the past few months of the government saying, hey, we've got a federal source code policy, we are going to open source our code. The policy also spells out that they need to build communities around that. And I think that's probably the most important thing to understand about open source software. Just putting software into GitHub does not a community make. And if you want contributions, if you want the long tail of contributions, you really need to build a community around there. So going out and advocating for the software you've open sourced to be used by other people, the reuse, all of that is something that I think the government is going to have to learn to do. And it can be quite difficult. So I find it quite inspirational. I'm looking forward to watching that progress.
Well, let's talk next about cybersecurity. There's often the contradiction of perceptions that open source somehow makes it more challenging to be secure in developing software. What's your take on it?
Yeah, actually, Michael Hermes, the CTO of DHS, this morning said, there is no security through obscurity. And I think he is absolutely right on that. We like to say that open source makes for, and open source and many eyes on code makes for very, very shallow bugs. And that means that the more people you have looking at that code, the more opportunities you have to find those problems and solve them. But I think further than that, there's also this idea of opening the tooling that we use around security. So we have efforts underway like OpenSCAP, and the SCAP security guide, which is a collaborative process between the NSA and DISA to say, hey, we're going to conform to 853. This is the way that we're going to do it. And then we're going to automate this entire process so that as a government agency, I don't have to go reinvent the wheel. And further, Red Hat now provides that content within our installer so that as a system administrator is building a host within their data center or a cloud, they can select, I want to conform to the DISA STIG and have that implemented at install time.
I'd like to also ask about IT modernization. In this context, U.S. CIO Tony Scott's been certainly out on the stump talking about the need to upgrade the agency's infrastructure.
Absolutely.
But how does open source help accelerate that or contribute to improving the whole stack, if you will?
Absolutely. You know, I think I was just reading over the House Oversight Committee's review of the IT modernization needs, and some of the things that stood out to me are the fact that we have decreased our spending year over year by $7 trillion, I think, trillion, billion, in innovation. We have spent less money on innovation over the last 7 years because that money is going towards O&M support, which is a tragedy. That means the government is no longer able to innovate. And so open source software is the genesis of innovation within the IT industry today. So the government's ability to tap in on that technology, especially in very modularized components that are commercially supported, is going to be critical. I do think, you know, if you think about the idea that we've got 3,400 developers maintaining COBOL and Fortran code.
That's amazing.
And that's just in civilian. Department of Labor and DoD were unable to report at the time. So that is a huge effort just going to maintaining code that could be up to 50 years old. This is a problem we are going to have to innovate ourselves out of as the federal government in concert with private industry. So I think that efforts like 18F, digital services, things of those nature are going to be critically important to finding those kernels of innovation that the government's going to be able to use to move that forward.
And lastly, what other areas, collaboration, mobility, the cloud, would you say that open source is making a big difference at?
Absolutely. So when I talk to customers about moving to the cloud, one of the first things they talk about is, I want to move this thing to the cloud. I want to move this workload to the cloud. And there are a couple of ways you can do that. You can absolutely pick up your workload and move it into a cloud. And by doing that, you've entered into a managed services contract with a cloud provider that you're now paying by the minute for, or by the hour, or however that model is set up, which is not a bad thing if that's your design and that's what you want to do. But if you actually want to leverage the value of that cloud and the dynamic capabilities that cloud bring to bear for your business, you really want to start to think about how you can automate into that cloud, possibly automate out of that cloud, right? That starts at home, in your data center at home. How am I going to automate this workload so efficiently within my home data center that I can automate it into my first cloud and then out of that cloud? Because you don't want a Hotel California situation, right? So I think that that level of automation becomes really, really important. Red Hat's really focused on that with a couple of our open source projects that we contribute to, Ansible and CloudForms. And then we productize those and support them for the federal government to make them reasonable and executable for their mission.
I appreciate that. Well, Adam Clater with Red Hat, thank you very much for joining us today.
Absolutely, it's been a pleasure.
Great. I'm Wyatt Cash with FedScoop. See more of our coverage on fedscoop.com. Thanks for being with us.